good evening and welcome to Vantage Point. A month from now, the country heads to a decisive general election. The battle lines have finally been drawn, the chips have fallen, the hands have been shown. Who will emerge victorious? We'll find out in due course. But to discuss the current political climate, the candidates that have come forward from each of the political fronts, we have with us Dr. Dayan Jayathilaka, political scientist and former diplomat. Thank you very much for being on the show. Good to have you back as well. Good to see you again. Dr. Jayathilaka, over the past week, one of the most significant developments, among the significant developments, of course, one is the granting of nominations to former President Mahinda Rajapaksa. He becomes the first former head of state of the country to seek election for a seat in Parliament. And also we have the formation of the United National Front for Good Governance. I'd like to start off first with the good governance side of this story. We've seen pretty much all of the political personalities and parties that supported President Maithripala Sirisena in his bid to become president on the 8th of January have aligned themselves or sided with the UNP, citing good governance. What is your take on this alliance?
Well, I'm struck by the fact that the individuals and the parties which have entered this coalition, this new coalition, with the UNP, did not do so when the UNP had a very different kind of leader, that is President Ranasinghe Premadasa, who I worked with. Now, I have no questions or problems about anybody forming an alliance with the UNP as such, but I would think that if it was on the basis of some kind of political criterion or political principle, it's much more likely that SLF peers and single nationalists would form a coalition with the UNP when somebody is out of the box, as unorthodox as Ranasinghe Premadasa were president, not when a centre-right neoliberal like Mr. Wickremesinghe were prime ministerial candidate.
But in this case, the actual principle that they've agreed on, that they've decided to move forward on, is one of democratic reforms to continue with what was started with the January 8th election. Won't they be able to achieve that regardless of who the UNP leader is?
No, they can't, because as the Daily Mirror pointed out on its front page, just after the nominations closed on the 13th at noon, the next day the Daily Mirror had a page one cartoon and lead story which said Ranil and Mahinda face off in prime ministerial stakes, and it was a sort of gunfight at Okekawal, Ranil and Mahinda. So the election is about who is going to be the Prime Minister.
But I think even that headline is a little preemptive, isn't it? Because the President, as the leader of the SLFP, has given no indication that even if victorious and even if the UPFA commands a majority in Parliament, that he would pick former President Mahinda Rajapaksa.
Well, by the same criteria, he was not going to give Mahinda the nomination to start with. Am I right? But he did. So it all depends on what the realities on the ground are. And if the UPFA has won under Mahinda's de facto leadership, because all the papers after the nomination had these two photographs, Ranil and Mahinda, just that. So the parties and the personalities who crossed over to the UNP have, as you said, done so on the basis of good governance. Now, Prime Minister Wickremesinghe was accused for many years of bad governance in the United National Party, his own party. The accusation from Mr. Sajid Premadasa, from Karu Jasuria, from Dasari Jasekara, from Sujiva Senasinghe was that he was running a dictatorship, that he had ignored the people's mandate, that he had lost many times. He was not stepping down. In fact, he had tightened control over the UNP by altering the UNP's constitution. I fail to see how such a personality, accepting the leadership of Mr. Wickremesinghe, can possibly be consonant with a project for good governance. If he had bad governance in his own party for 20 years, how can he be counted on to ensure good governance.
But do you think it's possible with under the leadership of former President Mahinda Rajapaksa?
Under the leadership of former President Mahinda Rajapaksa, possibly not. But it's not going to be under the leadership of former President Mahinda Rajapaksa. It's under the leadership of Maithripala Sirisena. Thanks to the fact that the 19th Amendment did not go the way that Mr. Wickremesinghe wanted, which is the downloading of power entirely from the presidency to the prime ministership. Instead, the Mahinda faction supported the non-Mahinda faction of the SLFP in helping President Sirisena retain core powers. So, Mahinda Rajapaksa, even if he wins and is prime minister, is going to have a glass ceiling, a lid, a cap in the form of President Sirisena. What's not to like?
Well, Dr. Atilaka, it's no secret that you work towards keeping President Rajapaksa in the political fray after the January 8th electoral defeat, and have contributed in no small measure, I assume, towards his return.
Infinitesimal in comparison to the role of the people. It's a popular movement.
But what is the purpose of his return?
Well,
what does he? Why is he returning? What does he hope to achieve through a return to Parliament?
Well, Nadeem, I think you know me well enough to know that I look at things from a comparative international perspective. So therefore, to me, Mahinda Rajapaksa striving to return is for the same reason that Juan Perón strove to return and did so after 30 years. It took much longer in the case of Perón. General Charles de Gaulle, who led France during the resistance, became the leader of France after the war and then had to go away, returned in 1958, 10 years later. The list is endless. I mean, Indira Gandhi lost in 77, back in 81. Nawaz Sharif, the present Prime Minister of Pakistan. I mean, we could go on and on and on. Vladimir Putin.
Yeah, but what is the purpose?
The purpose, I would say, firstly, the man is a political animal. That's what he does. He's a highly evolved political animal. Secondly, he's a populist, like many of these leaders. These are all the leaders who make a return are easily classifiable. These are either strong leaders who have led their countries at times of war, like Indira Gandhi, the Bangladesh war, or they're populists. Mahinda Rajapaksa is both. So return is what they do. And the third is a sense that the nation calls. You know, the people want me, and the people beckon. Therefore, I have to do this. And
want him to do what though? This is why I'll rephrase the question. What is the agenda? What does he hope to achieve, or what does he hope to change?
Well, given what he has been saying in public, I mean, it's irrelevant what he says in private, but I must say that what he says in private is pretty much what he's saying in public. In fact, he says it in private first, and then he goes and says it in public. Even when people close to him may not want him to say it in public. And what I have sensed is that there is a strong motivation to resume a developmental drive. He seems to be anguished by the visible, palpable stoppage of development activity, of modernization, of moving the country forward. Everything is stopped. The dirt is on the roads.
But according to his own party leader, the president, and also the government, the National Unity Government or UNP-led government, which suspended a lot of these projects, this had to be done because of a system of crony capitalism.
This from the guys who did the bond scam. Crony capitalism.
Yeah, but
I mean, on your own television station, Professor Rajiv Vijayasinghe came on and said that the Prime Minister, who happens to be his first cousin, was responsible ultimately responsible for 59 billion buck loss to the country. Now that's crony capitalism big time. So So, that's a little funny, but still.
But still, to go on with the question.
Yeah. So why didn't they just get rid of the cronies? It took 6 months and they haven't got rid of the cronies and resumed the development.
But there are processes to go through to resume those projects.
I mean, my lane has holes in it. It's had holes in it from January 8th. You're telling me that's because of crony capitalism. I say it's because of incompetence.
I'm guessing it probably had holes before the 8th of January as well.
No. These are holes that were made by a team. I mean, it's happened all over the place. All over. There are places that are dug which have stopped. There are backhoes and bulldozers which have stopped. Jobs which have shrunk. There's been a halt of development activity, and I think that one of the biggest motivations for Mahinda Rajapaksa
is to resume the development drive.
Yeah.
Fair enough.
That's one.
If he does come back with the primary motivation of resuming the development drive and maybe realigning foreign policy.
That doesn't seem to be one of his priorities, but I suppose it will follow. Yeah?
I suppose it will follow, knowing former President Mahinda Rajapaksa and where his political ideology lies, if you may, when it comes to foreign policy, maybe realigning the foreign policy as well.
But will this source of the economic
will this all be done at the expense of democratic reforms?
No, because Maithripala Sirisena is the president. I mean, Maithripala Sirisena, I see Mahinda and Maithripala as two sides of the same coin. I've always said that Maithripala Sirisena was Mahinda Rajapaksa light, and now it's being proved. Maithripala Sirisena represents the democratic or liberal democratic reformist impulse which was embedded within the Sri Lanka Freedom Party from its founding in 1951. This was S.W.R.D. Bandaranaike, essentially. But S.W.R.D. Bandaranaike himself and the Sri Lanka Freedom Party, therefore, had another aspect, which was a nationalist, populist aspect. Mahinda Rajapaksa is the inheritor of that aspect. So, what I see here is a convergence. These guys are not buddies, but it's a convergence of two aspects of the same heritage and the same tradition of a center-left party.
So you think that fair enough, President Maithripala Sirisena is, he has already demonstrated that he is that center-left figure, liberal democrat. But if former President Mahinda Rajapaksa does emerge as Prime Minister and commands a majority, commands the confidence of the majority of MPs in Parliament, he wouldn't, with Parliament behind him as Prime Minister, he wouldn't have to worry too much about the President, would he?
No, because if the 19th Amendment had gone the way that Mr. Wickremesinghe wanted, with the entirety of power transferred from the executive presidency to the Prime Minister and the Parliament, then Mahinda Rajapaksa wouldn't have had to worry. But Mahinda Rajapaksa and those who supported him made an existential choice precisely during the debate on the 19th Amendment. And I would say that the convergence or the reconvergence of Maitri and Mahinda began with the 19th Amendment. When President Sirisena saw that what Prime Minister Wickremesinghe had in mind was not the reform of an authoritarian presidency, which retained the presidential system but rebalanced it, but precisely a shift from an authoritarian presidency to an authoritarian prime ministership. Therefore, he relied on the SLFP to fight that off. In that battle, Mahinda Rajapaksa had a choice to make. He clearly aspired to the post of Prime Minister. He could have pulled the plug on Maithripala Sirisena and told his people, vote with the UNP, shift the power to the Prime Ministership because I hope to be the Prime Minister. Instead, he took an ideological decision. I wouldn't even say principled. He took an ideological decision. And that decision was that a strong state mattered more than a hugely empowered prime ministership, which he hoped to occupy in a few months. So, the Mahinda faction and the Maitri faction worked together to stop and dilute Rana's 19th Amendment, not to overturn it, but to dilute it. And for some reason, the Prime Minister attributed a disproportionate role to me, which is why on April 23rd, in his live 2-hour television broadcast, his interview with Sam Asghar, he went out of his way to name me 3 times. He's never criticized even Prabhakaran that many times. But somehow, anyway, that's in the context of the battle over the 19th Amendment. So I would say that Mahinda Rajapaksa knew that he was helping Maithripala retain a sizable share of power, and that even if he became PM, he'd have to operate within that equation and that structure, and he chose to do
I want to ask you this question, as a political scientist and as a person who backed the revival or the return of former President Mahinda Rajapaksa. Where do you see yourself in this equation of populist, nationalist, or liberal Democrat? Which are you?
Well, Nadeem, I wouldn't want to bore the viewers, but I think what a man does is more important than what he says he does. And what I did was I supported President Premadasa as well.
Populist nationalist.
Very publicly, very openly. So I would say that I would like a combination, and I see the possibility of a combination in a Maitri Mahinda equation. But if I had to choose between a pro-Western liberal Democrat, especially a center-right liberal Democrat, and a center-left nationalist populist, even if he's UNP, I would go with the latter because I believe in national sovereignty and a pro-people approach, and I don't care which party it's from. I was accused of being how can you as a Marxist support Rana Singh Premadasa of the UNP? But I did. And it's the same reason that made me support Mahinda in 2005, actually from 2003. I delivered the D.A. Rajapaksa Memorial Lecture in 2003. In 2010, despite the fact that I've been fired from Geneva, and again in 2015, and now as the Prime Ministerial candidate de facto. That's the reason. So it's not just about Mahinda.
So it is a policy decision.
It's a policy of supporting in the third world, wherever in the third world it is, leaders such as Chavez, who are progressive, who stand for national sovereignty, who are strong leaders, who stand for the dignity of their people. I don't care which side of which end of the political spectrum they come from.
You mentioned Chavez.
Yeah.
Progressive may be on some fronts, but very restrictive when it comes to individual freedoms and liberties.
Well, if you talk to the poor in the favelas of Caracas, they'd say they never felt free than under Chavez, because that freedom became real in economic and social terms.
Well,
there are doctors from Cuba who worked in little clinics, and when you're sick, and you can't afford to go to a doctor, a private doctor in the city, and Chavez has brought in clinics into the neighborhood, then that's freedom.
You could also, I would then allude to President Maithripala Sirisena's speech in his maiden televised address to the nation, where he referred to the African American slaves freed by U.S. President Abraham Lincoln, and he said that there were slaves who rejected freedom.
Well, I wonder who wrote that speech, because it was all nonsense. The slaves, the Emancipation Proclamation came in the middle of the Civil War, and it freed up a huge amount of slaves who immediately joined the Union Army and helped win the war. So I don't know who told him that, but it's strictly not true.
Well, there were definitely slaves who chose to remain in that position. We've seen, for example, slaves owned by a Confederate Vice President, by the Confederate Vice President.
Well, that was slaves owned by Thomas Jefferson, right? But that didn't mean that when emancipation came, that they opted to stay slaves. I've never heard of that phenomenon. And there must have been one or two who were not really slaves. They were known as house niggers. Uncle Toms, who Malcolm X laughed at. But these were a few who stayed on. I mean, I think somebody who wrote that speech got it completely cockeyed.
Okay, let's move on from that. Let's take a look at where the JVP is standing on this election. As the third party, they are recognized as the third major political force in the country. The JVP has been through some changes in the recent past with their leadership, and also they'll be contesting the elections with embracing preferential voting, a shift, major shift for them as well. How do you see the JVP in the present political climate? Are they a major player?
Well, I think the JVP got it wrong. It did well by bringing in or promoting Anil Kumar as its leader. But it's never going to be able to really live down the charge that it supported and was a member of the National Executive Council. It supported Ranil Wickremesinghe as Prime Minister. I mean, it knew that Ranil was going to be PM. It sat in the National Executive Council with Ranil and Chandrika. Now that's a major shift to the right. What it could have done, I'm not saying it should have supported Mahinda, not at all. It should have been a critic of Mahinda's, it should have opposed Mahinda, but not being seen to go along with Ranil. In fact, what it is doing now, it should have done 6 months ago. And the vulnerability is shown up by the critique of the JVP, not only from its old leader, Somawan Samarasinghe, who says that they had become the lapdog of the UNP. I mean, he's past his shelf life. But far more importantly, the critics from the FSP, the breakaway JVP, the young guys, who are contesting in every district, just like the JVP. And these are ex-JVP guys, young people. They dominate the students' movement. The Inter-University Student Federation is dominated by the Frontline Socialist Party. And their criticism of the JVP and Anwar Kumar in particular is that he supported Ranil and he's sort of Ranil in a red shirt. Now Anwar is trying to lead that down, but he may find that quite a few of the votes that might have come to the JVP will now stay home or may go to the FSP. The FSP will never be larger than the JVP, not this time around, but they are going to split off some votes from the JVP.
So you don't think that it was intentions, for example, that the intention of the JVP in January was to ensure the defeat of Mahinda Rajapaksa, and their intention now is to ensure that they have a strong showing in Parliament?
Yeah, but there's a smart way of doing it and there's a dumb way of doing it. The JVP, the cadre of the JVP, was born out of the struggle against precisely Ranil's white paper on higher education in 1981. That is when many of these guys were students, and they fought precisely against the Minister of Higher Education. Ranil has always been on the right wing of the UNP, and the JVP and Ranil have fought it out sometimes, not merely verbally, Batalanga, etc., in the 80s and the 90s. So it would have caused some dissonance in the ranks of the JVP to attack Mahinda more than they did Ranil, because Mahinda was seen as a kind of an anti-imperialist guy and so on. I think they could have done both, because Vijay was very good at attacking the two major parties equally. I mean, to wax Shakespearean, a plague on both your houses. But instead, Mr. Dissanayake, who probably didn't know Shakespeare, cried a plague on one of your houses and not so much on the other. And therefore, they lost that third space. They still have some of it, but it's nothing like what they could have had.
Dr. Athir, I want to refer to one of your latest pieces, one of your latest articles, where you referred to this government, the outgoing government, or maybe the government that will remain after the election. You referred to it as a minoritarian government. Why is it a minoritarian government?
Well, firstly, the sentence says that there was a widespread perception.
Yeah.
Widespread perception. And this perception has historical antecedents. If you take a very interesting book on Sri Lankan politics, the PhD thesis of Professor Nira Wickremesinghe, who got a PhD at 25 from Oxford, it was called Ethnic Politics in Colonial Ceylon. And she traces a certain pattern which is extended to date, which is of an establishment which configures itself as pro-Western, pro-minority, center-right. And this goes back to the 1920s and 30s. And then there's a backlash, what she calls singular reconquista, which is Spanish, for the Spanish reconquest of the Moorish areas of Spain. So reconquista, it reacts against and tries to reconquer a disproportionate political space which is seen, rightly or wrongly, to be occupied by the minorities. And the minorities play into this by striking out for much more than their numbers would warrant in any democratic society. So we have 50-50.
Do you believe that is the case in Sri Lanka? That there is disproportionate
I think she's right, and we see this again in 56, where there was a perception that Sir John Kotalawala was tilting to the minorities. You see that again in 1970, where this was said about.
But perceptions aside,
well,
is that a reality?
Perception is what I
yeah. Well, in your opinion, is it a reality? Is there disproportionate
in my opinion, under President Premadasa, you had a policy which was inclusive towards the minorities, but which did not make the majority feel insecure. To the extent that when Professor G.L. Pires, as the Vice Chancellor of the University of Colombo, fired Professor Nalin De Silva, there wasn't even a single placard in defense of Nalin De Silva, who represented the singular nationalist movement, Chintana Parshade or something like that. Champika was a member of that. But they couldn't do a thing. And not because they were going to be right-winged, but because Premadasa's flank was covered on the nationalist front. But that's the only time I have known a UNP administration not to be vulnerable to the charge of minoritarianism. But he was able to win over the minorities and the majority, a chunk of the majority. But under Prime Minister Wickremesinghe in 2001-2003, you had the perception, and I might say the reality, of a huge tilt to the LTT, even a policy of appeasement. So he still has that sin to live down, and he didn't live it down this time, because you had some very strange things, like his Deputy Minister Vijayakala Maheshwaran appearing on your television station on a panel discussion, and not only saying that the army in the north was bad, but actually saying that when the LTT was running the north, that women and children were safer. Now this is an organization that is denounced the world over for kidnapping children, for child recruits. And Rosie Saranayake, seated next to her, didn't say a word. The same thing happened when Chief Minister Vigneshwaran said that the army was responsible for drug peddling in the north, and he said the army must leave the north and east, and John Amartunga, seated next to him, didn't say anything. So the public perception is that this is a government that permits the trashing of the army and the glorification of the tigers in a manner that no SLFP government or more nationalist UNP government, say under Karu Jayasuriya, would have, or Sajid Premadasa.
But let's leave aside perception, look at the reality. For example, a few weeks ago I had met with the chairman of the Northern Provincial Council, Mr. Sivanyanam, who admits himself to having supported the LTTE at one point in his life, and admits to being having been a Tamil nationalist, but is now on a more progressive sort of footing, on a more progressive ideology, let's say. But even Mr. Sivanyanam was saying that as long as the sentiment in the north, among Tamils in the north and in the east, is that they are oppressees because of a large military presence, reconciliation is not going to be possible. It's going to be a huge detriment to reconciliation. So these are real issues that need to be dealt with, leaving aside the political chess game.
No, absolutely, Nadeem.
So under whom? So these, in a manner of speaking, this is probably for the country as well. As much as development drives, as much as the country needs to grow, to have development, to ensure that there is job creation, to ensure that there is democratic reforms, there also needs to be reconciliation.
Yes.
We have this conversation as well about our sense. What is our sense of Sri Lanka? There needs to be a sense of shared values.
Yeah.
But what he also agreed with me on this, that there is a dire need for a sense of shared values among all the sections of the populace, regardless of community or religion. Can that be achieved by majoritarianism?
No, it can't, nothing. But it can't be achieved by minoritarianism either. Now,
how do you balance it? How do you balance it out?
That's not difficult. Chief Minister Vigneswaran stopped the resolution on genocide.
Yeah.
Stopped the resolution on genocide when Mahinda Rajapaksa was president. He brought it in, a 12-page resolution on genocide, and piloted it through the council, ratified it, and gave it to Jeffrey Feltman of the United Nations when Ranil Wickremesinghe was Prime Minister.
There was also a chess move though, wasn't it? A political chess move.
Well, it's a chess move he couldn't have made if Mahinda were president.
Exactly. So you got to know your opponent.
No, you have to know, and the people have to know what the red lines are. Under Ranil Wickremesinghe, there are no red lines. There never were for the LTT in 2001, 2003, and there don't seem to be red lines for excessive, extreme minoritarianism now. So, the question is, reconciliation, what is the best combination? I would say it's Maitri Mahinda rather than Maitri Ranil, because Ranil is not trusted by the majority. You need somebody who's trusted by the majority, but capped by somebody who is a reformist and committed to reconciliation. And Maitri is committed to reconciliation.
Okay, let's go by the former president's track record. Yeah. Former President Mahinda Rajapaksa. Do you think that he made, besides ending the conflict,
that's a huge besides.
It's a huge besides, but I'm talking in terms of reconciliation, especially in his second term as president, which is just after ending the conflict. Do you think he made any advancements towards reconciliation?
Well, yes, but not enough. He made huge strides in this sense. Now, if you take history, whether it's the Roman Empire or the British, what unifies people, or even the United States, I mean, this time the theme of U.S. Independence Day was Route 66, which is the highway, the interstate highway. What unifies communities, nations, are roads, railways, trains, which end isolation. Mahinda Rajapaksa did that. He not only ended the war, he broke through the Kajang curtain by re-establishing the links, reunifying the economy.
But see,
that is in real terms. True. What he didn't do was to win hearts and minds. Now, Maithripala Sirisena is good at that. That is why I think that you need a combination of somebody who has the trust of the majority in the armed forces, Mahinda Rajapaksa, with somebody who is demonstrably committed to a softer touch and to the healing process, i.e. Maithripala Sirisena. But if you have Maitri and Ranil, then you have an administration under Ranil that will not be trusted by the majority and will be permanently under siege. And that is what happened whenever the UNP was in office. That is why you had a backlash in 56, because the UNP was vulnerable. You had a backlash in 1970, again because the UNP was vulnerable. And I don't even want to talk about the Javadan administration, where you have this horrible July 83, and you also have this southern insurrection against the Indo-Lanka Accord. It was only under Premadasa that there was no pressure from the Sinhala populist or Sinhala right. And with Ranil, there will be complete instability because he can never take the Sinhalese along with him. I mean, look at the whole bond issue. The first problem there was that going against President Sirisena's wishes, he appointed somebody who didn't even have Sri Lankan citizenship, a member of the diaspora, in charge of the Central Bank of Sri Lanka. Now, what is the impression that conveys? This is a guy who doesn't care about being Sri Lankan. So if you don't have an identity, a strong sense of being Sri Lankan, then you can't reconcile the majority and the minority, because you can't reconcile with the majority to start with.
Well, on the flip side, let's look at former President Rajapaksa. One of the sentiments that was echoed a lot by young political activists in the north. During a recent visit, I met these people from various different political parties, including even the EPDP and also the EPRLF, and the ITAC, is that during his tenure as president, especially following the Northern Provincial Council elections, even in the face of overtures from the TNA leadership, especially from Chief Minister C.V. Vigneswaran, who accepted Mahinda Rajapaksa as head of state, as president of the country, and took oaths, that in spite of all of that, in spite of that massive gesture, a huge gesture for Mr. Vigneswaran, I would say, risking some political mileage, it was used against him eventually, but took that risk, made an overture, no response, is what the sentiment is. Is that the president remained to be seen as a uncompromising and stubborn majoritarian leader?
That's a complete lie, Nadi. Even I was there. I mean, literally. Let me tell you why. In the first place, Mahinda Rajapaksa had options other than holding elections in 2009 onwards in the north. He could have delayed those. He knew he was not going to win. He had every kind of election after the war at every level. Municipal, parliamentary, provincial council, presidential. Presidential he had to have anyway. And he had those knowing full well that there was no way he was going to win. He had the provincial council election despite the fact that his brothers didn't want him to have it. And that some of his supporters like Vimal and Champika were opposed to it. He went ahead and re-enfranchised the people of the north. Vigneswaran wouldn't be sitting there and there wouldn't be a provincial council if not for Mahinda Rajapaksa having that election. Now, I was invited for some strange reason, probably because of my support for the 13th Amendment, for the investiture.
Possibly because of your status as a former provincial minister.
Yes, I was invited for the investiture. And there I was, having lunch with Mr. Vigneswaran, and I spotted some guy seated there in a suit, tall guy in a suit. I thought, where have I seen this guy before? I know this guy. And then I saw him acting as a kind of aide to Justice Vigneswaran. So, I saw President Rajapaksa talking to the TNA very cordially. He gave a gift to C.V. Vigneswaran. We all stood for a photograph, on the steps, and off we went. And within hours, Justice Vigneswaran and Chief Minister Vigneswaran issued a statement, a half-page statement, in which you had the mention of internal self-determination. Now, you've just been sworn in. It's a sensitive issue. Mahinda Rajapaksa had to fight off his own brother in order to have this election. You're sworn in, you come out, and in a few hours you sign a statement, you release a statement which talks about self-determination. Then I asked around and found out who this guy was. The guy I saw in the suit, who has gone along with Vigneswaran now to the United States on the visit to the US. He's on a visit to the US now, where he talked about the genocide resolution. This is a guy called Nirmalan Karthikeyan, who belonged to the TRO, the time that it was banned and not by Mahinda Rajapaksa, and was a member of the LTT negotiating team. And he is now an aide to Vigneswaran. He was there on the day of the signing. And I'm pretty sure the guy drafted the statement which Vigneswaran signed off on within hours. I mean, you poke Mahinda Rajapaksa in the eye just after he's sworn in as the Chief Minister. That's not reconciliation. And I was talking to some of my friends in Tamil politics, and what they say is that, look, whether it's Sumandaran or Vigneswaran, they're both lawyers, they're now just dancing to the tune of their clients, and their clients are in the diaspora.
So you're saying that reconciliation on both sides as being that the political chess game on both sides.
No, there's a consistent pattern to this. I mean, the Sobey Commission turned down 50-50 because they said you can't turn a minority into a majority and a majority into a minority. You cannot have the combined majorities having 50% when the demographics are different. And D.S. Nayaka offered 60-40, but it was rejected. So this is a consistent, recurrent pattern of overreach, which undermines your southern peace partner. Mahinda Rajapaksa was weaker, having taken the risk of having the provincial council, and then having these guys behave in this way, than he was before he had the provincial council election. And they've undermined both Ranil and Maitripala as well by the genocide resolution. That's going to cost votes.
How do you move forward from something like this? I mean, if you had to speak to the people, the citizenry, and tell them, all right, this is what's going on. True, we're doing this. We're sort of doing it on this program as well. But this is what's going on. This is the chess game that you have become pawns in. It is so for the extremist southerners and the extremist northerners as well. You've been caught in this pattern. How do you get rid of it? How do you free yourself from it?
Easy. Again, I would go by what the Buddha and Aristotle both said. They couldn't both be wrong. I'm talking about the middle path of Lord Buddha and the golden mean of Aristotle. There are those on the Tamil side who say the 13th Amendment is not enough and we have to move towards federalism. I noticed that Prime Minister Wickremesinghe, in his kick-off speech on July 11th at Campbell Park, dropped the term unitary. He spoke about devolution within a united Sri Lanka. He conspicuously avoided the use of the term unitary. So that's probably pandering to that audience which says you have to go beyond a unitary state. Jayampatha Wickramaratne says this. He's now on the UNFF nationalist. Mangala Samaraveera has said this. So that's one side. Then there are the singular hardliners who think that the 13th Amendment is too much and you have to dismantle this wretched system, devolve to the district. I would say you adopt the middle path.
As a former provincial minister, where do you stand on the 13th Amendment?
I am for the 13th Amendment. I am for the 13th Amendment and I think there are certain problems, and the way that can be handled is by revisiting the concurrent list. There are powers that both the periphery and the center hold together. You can revisit that and redistribute the powers of the concurrent list. So the periphery, the province has more powers, and some of the powers that the center doesn't want to give, it can hold on to, but as part of a swap. It's like
on police and land powers.
Yeah.
Where do you stand?
Police no, land, the powers of the 13th Amendment.
Why police no?
Because there are security apprehensions. And it's too close to Tamil Nadu. I mean, geopolitics counts. You have a northern province that is geographically closer to India than it is to Colombo. And you have anti-Sri Lankan sentiment in Tamil Nadu. You have anti-Sri Lankan sentiment in the north. I wouldn't give those guys guns. No to police powers, not for 10 years. Let's see how people
to start with, I wouldn't give the police guns to start with.
Yeah, but if you had to, I wouldn't give.
I'm saying that police is its internal domestic policing.
Have a policeman. I mean, multi-ethnicize your police force, but no police powers for the north. Land powers, you cannot remove a single comma from the land powers in the 13th Amendment, otherwise the whole deal falls through. And what does the 13th Amendment say about land? It says that state land, which used to be called crown land, and inter-provincial irrigation works remain with Colombo. And the rest is with the province. Now, when negotiations started between Rajapaksa and the TNA in 2011, the TNA proposed that even the utilization of state lands has to be with the permission and the concurrence of the Chief Minister, and that was a deal breaker. That was a deal breaker because you have 2/3, you have 1/3 of the land of the island, and there's for development work, land pressure, and so on. you still need access to that state land. It can't be with the permission of the Chief Minister. So I would say you stick to the land powers, you implement the 13th Amendment as far as land goes. But you have a freeze on the police powers. And there's no sense in talking about police and land. This is a singular chauvinist trick which the Tamil chauvinists also use. There's no such thing as police and land. There's police powers and there are land powers. They're two very separate things.
But see, even with the matter of police, it still comes under a National Police Commission, the provincial police departments.
Yeah. But it can easily turn into a militia. I mean, look what happened to the Yugoslav army. No, I don't think so.
I don't think Sri Lanka is as far gone as Yugoslavia.
No, it's not thanks to the fact that Mahinda won the war. But too close to Tamil Nadu. No police powers. And I saw what happened when we had police powers. I was the minister. The CVF, the Civil Volunteer Force. And that became a militia. So, police powers, no. Multi-ethnicize the police force, multi-ethnicize the army.
Ghosts of the past that the country must shake off. Let's get back to the subject of the general election. Field Marshal Sarath Fonseca's Democratic Party is also contesting the election. Fonseca himself will be contesting from the Colombo district. Where do you see, during the Western Provincial Council election especially, we saw them emerge as a possible contender for the position of third force. Where do you see the Democratic Party now?
I think Field Marshal Fonseca hit his peak when he was given the post of the title of Field Marshal. I don't think he has shown any political talents whatsoever. So I don't think he's going to do well.
What about Anoma Fonseca, Kampala district?
Well, she was very talented, but Field Marshal Fonseca should have fielded her for the Western Provincial Council election as Chief Minister. He didn't. If he did so, she may have won.
May have won?
Yeah.
Over the UPFA?
At the moment, when people were talking about Anoma Fonseca, she communicated very well. There was a lot of empathy. He should have put her forward then, not now. Now, I think the time has come and gone. I mean, she'll win. I mean, she'll get in. Probably she'll get into Parliament, but that's it.
In your article, you seemed quite certain of a UPFA victory. Aren't you more, do you still hold that level of certainty?
I think it's more likely than not, and my reasons are really 3 or 4-fold. One is an unpacking of the results of January 8th when Mahinda Rajapaksa lost. And we see that the difference between January 8th and August 17th is that the fight between the UNP and the SLFP is going to take place not in the north and east, which was so decisive in tilting the outcome of the election, but in the southern two-thirds, the so-called Sinhala heartland, in which Mahinda won even when he lost. He won more electorates, he won a higher percentage, the Swan did not win those areas, and that's the battleground, that's the playing field, that's the pitch on which this battle or this match is taking place. That's one reason.
But you can't discount the north and east. I mean,
yeah, but they will come in only as coalition partners.
They will come in as coalition partners.
But then the UNP
probably more likely to align with the UNF.
They will definitely. But Mahinda and Ranil fight it out on a terrain in which Mahinda won even when he lost on January 8th. The second reason is that Ranil and Mahinda had fought before 2005 and Ranil lost. He ducked 2 other fights in 2010 and 2015, but now he's back in the ring with Mahinda. And there's no reason to think that the past 10 years have increased his stature beyond that of Mahinda Rajapaksa, because Mahinda, since 2005, he's won a war and he's helped, he's accelerated the development of the country. So
Mr. Wickremesinghe has managed to hold on to leadership of his party.
Yeah, that's his greatest.
That former President Mahinda Rajapaksa had to give up.
Yeah, but Mahinda to give up his party and he is back. I mean, just when you thought it was safe to get back into the water.
Mr. Wickremesinghe has had no problems coming back after election defeats.
Yeah, I know.
Maintained his
How
hold as
many have
party
lost
leader.
count?
But maintained his hold as party leader.
Yeah, I know. He's pretty good at that. He holds on to that real
So
estate.
definitely a political animal in his own right, I suppose.
Yes, very dogged, very dogged. So the second reason is Ranil versus Mahinda, and this election is an election about who's going to be the Prime Minister. And I think that even those who are a little disconcerted about the abuse of power during the Rajapaksa period would feel safe that Maithripala Sirisena is the president, so they can afford to plug Mahinda Rajapaksa back into the equation and get the energies from him, but be safe because his family, I mean, you don't see Basil Rajapaksa contesting, Gotabaya is not contesting, so I think it's...
Namal Rajapaksa is contesting.
Yeah, but that's Maithripala's choice. I mean, finally, President Sirisena, according to speculation,
we have very little time left, so I want to cover this. This is something that you said earlier. I actually brought this up on Face the Nation last week, where around the same time this year, on this program, we were having a around the same time last year, on this program, we were having a conversation about a possible deep state in Sri Lanka. A cartel hijacking the Sri Lankan state.
Yeah.
This was under the regime of President Rajapaksa.
Correct.
I'm not fearful that return of Mahinda Rajapaksa would also herald or create space for a return of that cartel.
Well, I'm far more fearful of the economic cartel and the economic deep state that made off with all that money in the bond scam. I mean, you know, in 100 days, if they can do that in 100 days, imagine what they'll do in 5 years. I'm more scared of that, and I'm scared of the dismantling of the state proper by a Wickremesinghe prime ministership. So a diasporification of the state. I'm more worried about that. I mean, first we have to have a state, and as a political scientist, I would value a leader who first safeguarded the citizenry during a time of war from its enemies, and that was Mahinda Rajapaksa. Now, as far as the deep state resurfacing, as I said, thanks to the 19th Amendment, which didn't go Ranil's way, you have a balance of power. You have Maitri and you have Mahinda. So the choice is really, the choices are twofold. One, does the voter prefer Ranil or Mahinda as the empowered Prime Minister of Sri Lanka? That's one. Knowing that if Ranil wins, he has said that there would be a new constitution where all power is transferred to the Prime Minister. In other words, there would be no more Maithripala Sirisena and Ranil would lead the country. So, do people want that or do they want Mahinda as Prime Minister? And two, do people feel more satisfied, safer, closer to a Maitri-Mahinda equation or to a Maitri-Ranil or Ranil-Maitri equation? So that's the choice. It depends on who you are and what you feel. And we will know in a month.
If you had a message for voters, leaving aside party affiliations, leaving aside personal affiliations, for voters, for the citizenry of this country, what should they be voting for?
They should vote having understood what the election is about, whichever the way they vote, that's fine. And they must vote knowing that this is about choosing a Prime Minister, and they must know that if they make one choice rather than the other, there's going to be a very radical difference in the direction the country takes, whichever direction the voter decides to choose. If you vote one way, you will probably have a federal constitution, which, if you like, I mean, that's okay, that's one way to go, and a reorientation from Asia entirely to the West. This is one way of being for Sri Lanka. And if you vote the other way, you will have a more moderate center-left or moderate nationalist option, because you have a president who's in place, who has shown a healing touch, and a Prime Minister who's seen as an energetic nationalist, populist or developmentalist. So it depends on what you feel, who you feel closer to, who you feel better represented by, who represents me more, who is my more authentic representative, who am I authentically. It's an existential decision, and I think we must make an informed decision. I mean, if you're comfortable with that reality and that project, that option, I think people should vote that way. And we're all looking into a mirror at this election. The country as a collective, and each of us as individuals.
Be interesting to see what the mirror shows us.
Yes. Indeed.
Maybe we'll want to change what we see in the mirror.
So long as we don't smash the mirror.
Hey, keep the mirror, but give it a clean up.
Yeah.
Maybe remove the smudges. Well, that's enough for the metaphorical talk. Thank you very much. It's been, as always, been a very interesting conversation.
Thank you.
Thank you. And also thank you to our viewers. We'll see you again in a fortnight. Good night and good luck.